For the first time in 80 years, France's military is preparing for the unthinkable. Because here's what most people missed. For decades after the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet bloc, France kept cutting defense spending. Year after year, less money, less gear, less stockpiles, less readiness. And then everything changed. Ukraine, missiles, drones, Gaza, a world that suddenly feels like it's sliding back into something we thought was over. And the truth is, France is in the middle of its military comeback in its history. Why are they talking about handing out survival kits? France isn't just preparing for terrorist attacks anymore. It's preparing for war. And I know the weight of what I'm saying, but I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've dug through decades of official strategic defense reviews, so you don't have to. We're talking about documents coordinated at the highest state level, a roadmap for how the country prepares its defense. And after thousands of pages, what I found genuinely surprised me. Especially when it comes to the rising threat from Russia. Because one thing is clear, Macron looks ready to do whatever it takes if a major conflict ever breaks out. Et si vous pensez que tout cela n'est que de la politique lointaine, vous êtes sur le point de voir comment cela pourrait vous frapper directement. Votre vie, votre pouvoir d'achat. Et soyons honnêtes, nous le ressentons déjà, votre avenir. Car nous devons aussi poser la question inconfortable. Est-ce que ça vaut vraiment le coup de verser autant d'argent dans l'armée quand le pays a désespérément besoin d'aide dans les hôpitaux, l'éducation et les services publics de base? Et peut-être, soyons réalistes, où te situerais-tu dans un conflit à grande échelle? Aujourd'hui, j'en ai eu marre de l'anxiété médiatique constante qui inonde nos fils d'actualité. Alors, j'ai enquêté pour répondre à toutes vos questions. Everything really snaps in 2022. You already know what happened. Russia invades Ukraine, and for a few days people comfort themselves the same way they always do when conflict breaks out somewhere, except it's not that far. Ukraine is about 1,800 kilometers from France. If you live in Paris, that's like an army fighting somewhere around Athens. It's basically a 3-hour flight. More importantly, indeed, when a power like Russia attacks a European country, it triggers a chain reaction of problems that directly affects France. And this even if no soldiers are sent to the front, because first there's the risk of military escalation. Looking at a map, Ukraine is the last barrier before NATO. If tomorrow Russia goes too far, even by mistake, a missile that strays into a misidentified border territory, a strike too close, and Article 5 could be triggered. Then it's no longer a regional war, it's a war involving all of Europe and thus France. Certainly, it's a scenario that seemed inconceivable a few years ago, but today it's a reality. Next, and it's very important to remember, there's also the immediate economic impact, the one we've unfortunately all felt in our wallets. Exploding gas prices, soaring natural gas, and electricity becoming unaffordable. And that's just for individuals, because some businesses have to completely reevaluate their costs. Some are closing while others relocate. And that's how we realize that a war, fantasons jugeant 800 kilometers away, can completely destabilize the European economy, especially because Europe has largely depended on Russian energy for years and years. So when this energy disappears overnight, everything falters. But all that is far from the worst, because now comes geopolitical instability. And to face it, Europe must rearm and quickly. But the truth is, when France sharply boosts its military budget, it necessarily means less money for other sectors. But the first thing that struck me when I looked at France's rearmament plan was realizing how far behind we had fallen compared to other powers, who frankly didn't wait for us to rearm themselves. But looking at this plan also makes you realize that we weren't at all ready to face a long modern war across all sectors, including nuclear, even if no one likes to talk about it. Yet, for example, Russia doesn't hesitate to regularly remind everyone that it possesses one of the world's most powerful arsenals. Every intimidation, every ambiguous statement increases attention. This isn't a conventional conflict, because it's one where a minor verbal slip can exponentially escalate attention. And finally, there's the most underestimated psychological effect. For decades, the French believed war was distant, meant for others. But in 2020, once again, this illusion brutally disappeared. For the first time, we vaguely imagine the world order can shift, that peace is not a given, and great powers no longer fear testing limits. All this creates a heavy atmosphere of uncertainty, vulnerability, and above all, lasting instability. The real problem is that this war is unlike any other recent conflict. It's getting bogged down, it's dragging on. And when a war involving a nuclear superpower gets bogged down, it inevitably increases the risks. And the French armed forces have understood this very well. 413.3 billion euros. This sum is the total military budget over 7 years. It's a multi-year plan to completely rethink and modernize the French army. And thanks to this sum, France increases its defense budget year after year. So much so that from 32.7 billion euros in 2017, by 2026, we are now set to exceed 53 billion, reaching 69 billion by 2030, doubling the amount in just 15 years. But in my investigation, I could have stopped at the figures and forecasts. But I decided to dig a bit deeper, and luckily I stumbled upon a gold mine. In fact, what you're seeing is a document that can chill you to the bone, but its only goal is to find ways to best protect France. This is the National Strategic Review here, the one that sets the course for 2025 and beyond. It's fully accessible to the public, and in the 2025 edition they state black on white that the Russian invasion challenges the world order, that the return of interstate wars is a far more worrying reality than terrorist attacks, and that this forces France to enter a lasting war economy. This means they believe what we're experiencing isn't fleeting, but that we've entered a time where we must think like a nation that could be drawn into a major conflict. So much so, the Army Chief of Staff, General Pierre Schill, said something that should make many people react. Wait, it is the most significant transformation and modernization since World War II. With that, we clearly understand his intent. If we're undertaking the biggest military reform since 1945, it means we're no longer preparing for simple OPEX operations in Africa. And if this war never breaks out, which we obviously hope, just the fact that we can even consider it is already a huge shift. This shift is all the more drastic when we know we're coming from 30 years of complete disarmament, because to better understand where we're going, we first need to know where we've come from. And that's why before we see how France's rearmament plan will change our lives and the issues it raises, we must first grasp how much the French army lost after the Berlin Wall fell. So basically, we'll do it like at the doctors. Or before finding solutions, we'll take stock to see everything that's wrong, and believe me, there's quite a lot to say. To better understand France's current military situation, we need to go back a bit in time. But above all, we must not forget that for decades France, in terms of armament, was a war machine. We're talking hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of tanks, endless artillery stocks, conscription commonly called mandatory military service, not to mention enormous nuclear deterrence. In 1960, we invested almost 5.4% of our GDP in defense. For context, today it's barely 2%, with NATO's announced goal of 5% for all members. And back then, we had very good reasons to make such efforts. Indeed, we were in the Cold War, and France still held Algeria. The world was super tense, but in the 90s, everything changed. The USSR totally collapsed, Germany reunified, the European Union was built, and eastern borders opened. For many leaders of that era, in their minds, that was the story. The Great War was over. We've won. Now it's about dialogue, exchange and commerce among UN members. So for decades, we gradually dismantled military service. Under Jacques Chirac, we went from 500,000 active military personnel to about 180,000. We also eliminated part of our nuclear deterrence, reduced stockpiles, decreased fleets and closed regiments. Let's be honest, at that time, it seemed completely logical to do so. After enduring 2 world wars, the public never wants to hear of total war again. We want schools, hospitals, wages, not armored divisions in the Rhine waiting for a phantom foe that would never come.
We did well, actually.
You can get away with that as long as no one truly tests your system. The problem is that today, we realize we have downsized the army to such an extent that if a major conflict broke out tomorrow, we don't know if we'd be able to hold out for long. Because on the other side of Europe, some countries haven't taken the same path as us. And that's where the famous French comeback begins. Because out of the 450 billion that France gives to the army, you can imagine that the internal change the armies are currently undergoing is brutal. And at all levels, though many may be surprised by investment choices, one choice is unanimous and it's urgent to revive. I'm talking about nuclear power. Okay, let's be honest. Throughout this whole situation, the only thing stopping a large country like Russia from asking itself, shouldn't we go further than Ukraine? What if we attacked, for example, France, is nuclear weapons? Because the truth is, it's not just infantry or tanks, especially when we know that battlefields are now dominated by the buzzing of drones. What truly protects us is nuclear power, and more specifically, the deterrence that comes with it. What's more, France has a very rare feature in Europe. It has its own nuclear deterrence. Which means absolutely no one can cut off its button, neither Washington nor London, no Moscow. So yes, put like that, it sounds really good. And that's directly linked to Charles de Gaulle's legacy. Indeed, after the Nazi occupation, de Gaulle was obsessed with one idea: never again depend on another to survive. He would therefore launch French deterrence. And that's how in 1960, France became the fourth country in the world to test a nuclear weapon.
At the end of the Cold War, we had over 600 warheads. We felt invincible, safe no matter what. But today things have greatly changed and we're down to about 290 nuclear warheads.
But credit where credit's due, the warheads are far more modern now than before and thus much more reliable. And frankly, the core of it all is a peninsula in Brittany, Île-Longue. It's simple, this is partly where our entire nuclear defense rests. And that causes problems, because at Île-Longue you have the 4 nuclear ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs, each obviously capable of carrying 16 French M51 missiles with a range of 6 to 9,000 kilometers. And then you'll tell me, Twaylo, it's cool, we're fine, why panic?
It's simple. As long as one of these subs is at sea, no major power can attack France without risking destruction in return. Except, precisely, the French stance is 1 sub at sea, 1 preparing, 1 returning, 1 in maintenance. And each patrol lasts 70 days in total silence, so there's a big but.
The big issue is there are only 4 SSBNs. This creates a problem we didn't have before, as the fleet was much larger. It's no accident that Colonel and historian Michael Goya notes the naval force has been cut by a third in 25 years. I imagine now you see the problem. While in theory we have nuclear deterrence and everyone knows it, in practice everything changes. If one submarine has an accident, another is unavailable, or an adversary finds a way to neutralize one, you're dangerously close to a scenario you never want to face. The moment an adversary starts to think, what if they can retaliate after all? And for France, that's the worst strategic fear there is. That's why in the new budget, we'll go from 5.6 billion to 7 billion per year for nuclear. Obviously, it's not just about submarines. We are also discussing new nuclear air-to-ground missiles with 300 kiloton warheads able to strike over 500 kilometers, plus the purchase of 32 new aircraft by 2032, deployed across 27 air bases nationally. But we'll revisit our aviation's progress later. In short, a major part of France's comeback is nuclear. And this is a topic currently debated, as many believe the money should be reallocated to other military functions. But it doesn't work like that, because for French strategists, it's the only absolute guarantee that war will never cross a certain threshold. And the problem is clear: nuclear weapons aren't enough to manage every scenario. Because if sending a nuclear bomb was enough to handle all conflicts, we'd know it. So, we need other means to manage other types of wars, especially those that are more conventional. And that's where we look at the comeback the rest of the army is making. And believe me, there's a lot to see. You might be wondering why, if you're going to write a huge check to the French army, they don't invest it all in big tanks, in heavy infantry, which always scares enemies. But before I answer that, I need to tell you about another crucial element: NATO. But France is not alone. It's part of a military alliance where each country gradually specializes. And that's exactly what gives it this ultimate strength that stops superpowers from attacking us. For example, Poland relies on tanks and landmass. Germany, for its part, is trying to catch up on logistics and equipment, while the United States remains the king of global projection. And for France, we've identified 5 areas where it can be indispensable, namely the Navy, the Air and Space Force, cyber and nuclear, but we've already covered that. And beyond all that, our country has a truly unique and rare trait, especially today, that ensures an ironclad defense. France is one of the few countries globally with a completely favorable strategic environment. Indeed, it only has allies on its borders, and that can be very advantageous for us, especially knowing that in a European war scenario, there are 2 main fears. The very visible fear, literally tanks arriving, soldiers advancing through bombed cities, but also a much more insidious fear. The day you have no electricity, no network, no GPS, no satellites, while strikes fall 800 kilometers from your home. Often, a modern war begins with a total, silent, yet devastating blackout. We saw this, for instance, in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, where before attacking, Russia made sure Ukraine reverted to 1980, and it's precisely on this second type of fear that France is currently working. With the Navy specifically. I know the debate sounds strange, but but I'll explain. The French Navy has shrunk enormously since the 90s. From 1,300 combat ships then, we now have just over 200. This causes a huge problem. We lack ships to protect us from threats. Because in case of modern war or total blackout, as we've just seen, the sea is cargo supply routes, undersea internet cables, and flows of weapons and energy. Many things we don't necessarily imagine at first, but that are part of our daily lives. And to be honest, to best protect France, the plan to militarize the sea is absolutely massive. At the same time, is a huge necessity, especially knowing France has the world's second largest maritime domain thanks to its overseas territories. This naval modernization plan directly involves the new generation aircraft carrier Pang. We're talking about a behemoth twice the size of the Charles de Gaulle, which will obviously retain nuclear propulsion and enter service around 2038. Plus, 15 new frigates by 2030 will be able to escort it.
It's clear that a major conflict arises tomorrow to protect convoys and secure the Mediterranean or deter a foreign fleet from getting too close there. Europeans will surely need the French Navy.
Which, once again, guarantees that France will be at the heart of the escalation if things go haywire, because a blackout can happen from any side. But beyond the fear of a total blackout, we also have other fears. A blackout can come from anywhere, especially the sky, and the Air Force will handle this problem. Yet, looking at the Air Force stats objectively, we might think we're quite well off. Today, France has high-performance Rafale jets, long-range strike capabilities, and ultra-advanced air defense systems like SAMPTI. However, even if we thought we were well equipped, the truth is that with the new budget, we should increase air defense capacity by about 50% and also order many more planes while improving advanced early warning radars. But behind these promises, trust me, there are very real changes, because this literally means France will double its drone and missile interception capacity, which is great to hear, especially since we are hugely behind in this area. This involves massive Mamba system purchases, radar modernization, and new missiles to down faster, stealthier targets. Not to mention we'll get 42 new Rafales, the latest generation by 2030. But in reality, with replacements, losses and exports, this will mainly ensure we maintain an operational air group 24 hours a day, which hasn't been guaranteed for a long time. Additionally, the Air Force is prioritizing mail drones and micro drones. So for this, France has turned to Ukraine, its experts, to benefit from their know-how, because recent conflicts have shown that the sky is no longer just about fighter jets. It's become a battle of drones, jamming, and AI sensors. That's why we'll also have what we call voracious radars. These radars can detect low-flying cruise missiles or tiny drones up to 20 kilometers away. Suffice it to say, we'll never have had such effective territorial coverage. Not to mention the Navy's air defense frigates playing a crucial role. And that means in a crisis, even if missiles, kamikaze drones and planes test NATO's limits, France should be able to intercept or react. But sometimes missiles aren't limited to 10, 20, 30 kilometers in altitude. Sometimes the threat comes from even higher, and that's how we get to one of our most important points. And even if we don't talk about it much, and it's less flashy on BFM than a Rafale strike, the truth is that cyber and space will play a more than crucial role in the coming years, and that's not for nothing. In recent years, a true virtual battle is unfolding between countries. France has already been hit by extremely severe cyber attacks. While we are in peacetime, in a war context I can't even begin to imagine. This could lead to blocked hospitals, paralyzed banks, and knocked out administration. It's already tense, so with Russian hackers on our shores, I can't even imagine. But also weakened military sites and massive data leaks. So to avoid this scenario, the budget allocates around 4 billion for cyber and 6 billion for space. And it's not just for protection. In official documents, they speak of making cyber attacks particularly costly for the attacker and using all state resources to counter them. It also means that in space, it'll be the same. We're talking about surveillance satellites, advanced missile launch detection, and potentially systems to neutralize enemy satellites. But while we invest heavily in these strategic areas, there's still one place where we're extremely vulnerable. Because after seeing air, space, cyber, and sea, what about the ground? Because while we've always been considered the specialists, what about our army? And believe me, there are many surprises. Submarines, satellites, and cyber attacks are all well and good. But in the end, Ukraine reminded us of a very simple truth. A war is won on the ground with men, armored vehicles, artillery, and ammunition. We've recently seen that the only effective way the Russians found to advance was to move inland in pairs, regrouping behind Ukrainian trenches to slowly gain ground. Also, if you want more military strategy explanations on this channel, don't forget to subscribe and like. We say at 20,000 likes, I'll release a video on the topic because Ukraine presents many fascinating cases to analyze. Briefly, it's clear that for artillery and infantry, France's situation is not very reassuring. We'd have only between 200 and 250 operational tanks, a total of 6,000 5,000 armored vehicles, wheeled or tracked. For anti-tank systems, we'd have around a few hundred launchers, perhaps 1,000. And for artillery pieces, we'd be between 400 and 600. Now that might seem quite a lot, but when you look at a potential enemy like Russia, the scale brutally changes, because there, for heavy tanks, we're between 3,000 and 3,300. For armored vehicles, it would be over 30,000, and for launchers and artillery pieces, that would be in the tens of thousands.
That Russian artillery alone exceeds all of Western Europe's combined, then you might potentially tell me. But Twaylo, for reliability, the Russians are unreliable.
Given their struggles in Ukraine, why would they bother fighting NATO? Don't worry, we'll come back to that. But the real painful gap isn't just about vehicles, because then there's an issue that's worried all military personnel since 2022, the famous shell stocks. Indeed, at the start of the war in Ukraine, France produced about 1,000 artillery shells per month. Today, after some effort, we're producing 3,000 shells a month, aiming for 5,000. That seems like a lot, but when you know Ukraine some days use tens of thousands of shells, you realize that in a high-intensity war, our numbers are absolutely ridiculous. And it's quite ironic, because if we can't produce more, it's for a very good reason. In fact, we're blocked by something super trivial, gunpowder. For this, the key ingredient is nitrocellulose, also called gun cotton. And guess who supplies a lot of it? China, an ally of Russia. And coincidentally, since the war in Ukraine began, exports have become more complicated, more expensive and scarcer. To the point that a French parliamentary report clearly states the deterioration of ammunition stocks since the end of the Cold War has become untenable given the current context. And if I'm talking about shell stockpiles, it's to bring you back to the same question. If a major conflict broke out tomorrow in Europe, how long could France hold out before running out of ammunition? Because generals like Vincent Despotes are very direct about this. He notably says the Ukraine war shows high tech doesn't replace mass, and France's budget is insufficient to build a real army of scale. And when you combine that with the desire to remain sovereign, independent and autonomous, you understand why the comeback is so anticipated. If I check the 2025 Military Strategic Review and search for autonomy and sovereignty, I find autonomy 37 times and sovereignty 78 times. In contrast, for the US report, I only find sovereignty once and only to refer to other countries' sovereignty. Suffice it to say, we truly feel this will to move towards change and to best manage our military comeback, so we don't depend on anyone. And this is based on one great French fear, the fear of depending on someone else to survive. Because the goal after the Second World War was certainly obsessed with having a nuclear bomb, but he especially wanted not to be constrained by Washington or Moscow's decisions. That's why in 1966 he withdrew France from NATO's integrated command. Indeed, he remains an alliance member. Yes, he stands in solidarity, yes, but refuses American generals commanding French units. So much so that the words he spoke that day were extremely blunt, but very clear. France won't be led by an alliance it doesn't even control. This desire for absolute autonomy you'll also find in another area, like energy, where we're already scoring points. France, unlike Germany for example, is much less reliant on Russian gas. Why? Because we chose, for example, civilian nuclear power. And do you start to see the pattern? Every time behind the painful choices, budgets and reforms there's this fear. We never want to be in a position where we must beg someone else to save us, like what happened in the two world wars. That's why this comeback exists. But its problem is everything also has a cost, and that will inevitably impact your daily life. A war economy cannot be financed with magic because yes, in parallel with the massive increase in budgets for the army and defense, France is simultaneously announcing an increase in the retirement age from 62 to 64.
It cannot go on.
And we're seeing massive protests, blockades and anger. Many make the human connection. Why no pension funds but billions for aircraft carriers? Meanwhile, Macron stands by it, annoying some by explaining there's no luxury or comfort in this defense budget, and it passes on the...
It is this effort that will allow us to ensure our credibility with our partner.
In this debate, I'm here to set the record straight, because we all see prices, taxes, everything increasing. But the truth is that military effort is spent in ways few people see. It's crucial to note that France's arms economy is one of the few public sectors with a viable economic system. France has become the world's second largest arms exporter, surpassing Russia. And though still far behind the US, each year we sell over 500 armored vehicles, over 200 planes, over 120 artillery systems worldwide, totaling approximately 28 point atosam odekaro odekse odetime betsi vetsunis aksam odetuligatsi sots. 8 billion euros last year, which represents almost half of our annual military budget. So, the raw reality is that the French military comeback is funded by, of course, taxes on weapons sold to the rest of the world. We've gone through 100 years of history to better understand the French military comeback, but there's one very important thing I really wanted to discuss with you, to briefly touch on the current climate, which is extremely anxiety-inducing regarding current events, war, and so on. war, if it comes to France, won't be quite as you imagine. A massive invasion of France with Russian tanks in Strasbourg, frankly, that's almost impossible. There's almost no chance it will happen. As seen earlier, we share no border with Russia, we're NATO protected, and crucially, nuclear weapons. The most likely scenario is another NATO country attacked in the east. Due to treaties, especially Article 5, France must send resources, troops, and equipment. Even if France officially enters war tomorrow, it wouldn't be a direct general mobilization. France has an extremely well-trained professional army. Even if it sometimes lacks resources, it's exceptionally well-trained, that's a certainty. We also have reservists, hybrid capabilities, and before making a total commitment like we see on social media, on TikTok, people saying, I'm going to war. No, that won't happen. On the other hand, I understand those who see this French military comeback as a desperate escape, because on one hand we're pouring billions into submarines, frigates, drones, Rafales, satellites, but on the other hand we live in a country lacking resources, hospitals are understaffed, prices are rising, and so are taxes. But France justifies this military comeback notably by its commitments to NATO. And if France makes this military comeback, it's precisely to keep others from deciding our destiny one day. That's why they say it's better to be a soldier in a garden than a gardener on a battlefield. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting. I'm soon releasing my first major video on this channel where I filmed an intense exercise to see if France is ready for its military comeback. I saw this firsthand, so don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's crucial. Thank you all for watching. See you very soon. Take care. Hello.